There is a moment, quiet, unremarkable on the surface, where the old world and the new world look each other in the eye. No cameras catch it properly, no announcer names it. It happens in the space between a breath and a blink, and if you are not paying attention, it is already gone. But the people who were there that day, they never forgot it. They carried it home like a stone in a pocket. Small, heavy, warm in a way stones are not supposed to be. This is one of those moments. Sure, it was a gray Tuesday morning, the kind London does better than anywhere else on earth. Not miserable, not beautiful, just honestly gray. The sky a flat sheet of pewter pressing gently down on the rooftops of Buckingham Palace. The autumn had arrived without ceremony, stripping the gardens back to their bones, leaving only the iron-straight formality of the grounds and the men who kept them. Sergeant David Hartley had stood at this post for 19 years. He was not a man who used words like honor in casual conversation. He found such words slippery, prone to being borrowed by people who hadn't earned the right. But honor was, in fact, the architecture of everything he did. Every movement, every stance, every decision made in the 3 seconds that protocol demands and no more. He was 51 years old. His back had 2 opinions about the cold. He gave neither opinion any attention. That morning had begun the way most mornings began at the palace. With routine so deeply practiced, it had become something closer to instinct. The changing of the guard, the inspection, the stillness that settles over a palace, grounds when ceremony locks everything into place, like gears finding their teeth. Hartley had run through his duties by 7:15 and was positioned near the south entrance when the first car arrived. It was a modest convoy, 2 vehicles, no fanfare, at the kind of arrival that happened dozens of times a week at the palace, staff, visiting officials, members of the extended family moving through without announcement. He noted the plates from 30 meters away. His expression did not change. The second car door opened. Camilla, now the queen consort, stepped out in a deep charcoal coat, her aide 2 steps behind, a small briefcase exchanged between hands in the quiet choreography of arrival. She had been making this approach for years now, since Charles. Since the weight of the crown had settled on the family in ways that reshuffled everything. Proximity, protocol, the invisible architecture of who stood where and why. She walked with the particular unhurried confidence of a woman who has survived being underestimated by an entire country and come out the other side neither bitter nor broken. Hartley straightened. Standard acknowledgment. Had the practiced neutrality of a man whose job is to hold the line of ceremony regardless of who crosses it. Then the third car door opened. Princess Charlotte stepped out. She was 8 years old that autumn. She was wearing a navy coat with brass buttons that looked as though they had been polished to within an inch of their lives, and she was holding a small drawstring bag that she seemed to consider very important. She looked around the courtyard the way children do. Not with awe, exactly, but with a kind of alert curiosity, cataloging everything, the guards, the gravel, the gray sky, the pigeons on the roofline, as though she were a very small person assigned to write a very thorough report. Her mother, the Princess of Wales, stepped out behind her. And then the small, efficient machinery of arrival began. Bags handed off, greetings exchanged in low voices, the procession moving toward the entrance. Charlotte walked beside her mother for approximately 4 seconds. And then she stopped. She had spotted something near the east side of the courtyard. A guardsman in full ceremonial dress, motionless as architecture, bearskin hat sitting on his head like a structure that had been there longer than the building behind him. Charlotte stared. The guardsman did not stare back, because guardsmen do not stare. They exist in a category beyond staring. They are, in those moments, closer to monuments than men. Charlotte took a step toward him. Her mother said her name quietly, in that particular frequency mothers use when they mean, "Not now, darling. We are in a public place and people are watching." Charlotte paused, looked back, then looked at the guardsman again with the focused intensity of someone completing a very important calculation. She walked over to him. She stopped in front of him. This enormous man in his scarlet tunic, this absolute stillness wrapped in gold braid, and she looked up at him with absolute seriousness. Then she raised her small right hand and with considerable precision gave him a salute. It was not a sloppy salute. It was not a childish wave dressed up as something military. It was a real salute, the kind someone had clearly taught her. Fingers flat against her eyebrow, elbow at the right angle, the full formal weight of it given without irony or self-consciousness. And the courtyard did not stop. The world did not pause. The gray sky stayed gray. But every adult within 30 meters felt it. That particular atmospheric shift that happens when a child does something that carries more dignity than anyone expected. The guardsman remained still. Protocol is not cruelty. It is structure, and structure, maintained properly, is its own form of respect. But Sergeant Hartley, watching from his position near the entrance, felt something move in his chest. Not sentiment exactly, but its more durable cousin, recognition. He had seen a great many things in 19 years. He had seen heads of state walk through this courtyard. He had seen the palace absorb grief and celebration and history without changing its face. He had seen children brought through on visits, bewildered or bored or bouncing off walls. He had not seen this. And a child, a princess, offering a soldier the full formal respect of a salute without prompting, without performance, without even checking whether anyone was watching her do it. She had done it because she wanted to, because it seemed to her like the right thing. Hartley made a decision in the space that protocol allows. He stepped forward, not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself. Just forward, 3 measured steps, until he was close enough to be heard without raising his voice. Charlotte looked at him. She did not step back. She was, he noted, the kind of child who held her ground. He said, in a voice that carried the low, even authority of a man who has never once in his life needed to shout, "Ma'am!" Charlotte blinked. "When you give a salute," he said, "the person receiving it should return it." He looked, just briefly, the smallest redirection of attention, toward Camilla, who had paused in the middle of her own approach, and was watching this exchange with the expression of a woman who has learned that the most interesting things happen in the moments nobody planned. Charlotte followed his gaze. Then she looked back at Hartley. "She didn't," Charlotte said, factually, without accusation, just noting the record. "No," Hartley agreed. "She didn't." The pause that followed lasted perhaps 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, something shifted. In the courtyard, and in the cold autumn air, in the invisible architecture of ceremony and rank, and what it means when a small girl in a navy coat holds out her hand to tradition and tradition, for once, reaches back. Camilla had been watching the whole thing. She set down her briefcase. Camilla had been many things in her life. She had been misunderstood on a national scale. She had been the subject of headlines that stripped her to a single function: the complication, the other woman, and the wrong answer to a question the country had already decided. She had walked into rooms that went cold when she entered. She had accepted awards from people who were not sure they wanted to give them to her. She had stood beside a man she loved through years when loving him publicly cost something real, and she had paid that cost without theater, because theater was never her register. She had not, in all of that, been ordered to do anything by a palace guardsman. She picked up her briefcase. Then she set it down again. There was a particular quality to the way Sergeant Hartley had looked at her. Not insolent, not challenging, nothing that could be named as disrespect. It was something else, a prompt. The way a very good teacher looks at a student who already knows the answer and is simply waiting for them to say it aloud. Charlotte was still standing at attention. roughly. There was some drift in the left elbow that a real drill sergeant would have corrected, but the intent was there, unmistakable. Her small face arranged into the careful seriousness of a child who has decided this matters. Camilla walked over. Her aide started to follow. She raised one hand slightly without turning around, the universal signal for "I have this, stay where you are," and the aide stopped. The Princess of Wales had paused near the entrance and was watching, quiet, and the kind of stillness that is itself a form of permission. Camilla stopped in front of Charlotte. She looked at her, this girl with the navy coat and the brass buttons and the complete absence of self-consciousness. And for a moment, she was in several places at once. She was in this courtyard, in the gray morning, in the middle of a protocol no one had written. She was also somewhere further back, in a version of herself that had once been young enough to find things absurd, and before the weight of being watched had calcified into something she simply carried. She was in the years between, the long middle passage of becoming someone the institution could absorb. She raised her right hand. The salute was not performed. That is the only word for what made it different from a gesture. Camilla did not perform it. She gave it, with the unhurried precision of someone who understood what they were doing and had chosen to do it fully. Fingers flat, elbow angled, an eye steady on Charlotte's face. Charlotte's eyes went wide, not with surprise, with something more specific. The look of a child watching an adult confirm that the thing they suspected was real is, in fact, real. That the world does sometimes work the way it is supposed to. That respect is not a one-direction street even when rank runs the other way. She dropped her salute. Charlotte dropped hers. And then Charlotte smiled. The real kind, the kind children cannot manufacture. I'm the kind that moves too fast to pose. And she said in a voice that carried across the courtyard, because children do not yet know how to be quiet. You did it properly. Camilla said, so did you. Hartley had returned to his position near the entrance. His face had resumed its ceremonial composure. But one of the younger guardsmen standing 12 meters to his left would later describe to his wife at his kitchen table, over a dinner that was getting cold because the story was taking longer than expected, that Sergeant Hartley had, in that moment, the look of a man who had just seen something he was going to think about for a long time. Inside the palace, the morning continued. Meetings were attended, documents were reviewed. The ordinary business of the institution moved along its tracks like a train that has been running the same route so long the rails are worn smooth. But word travels in the way word always travels through institutions, quietly, selectively, faster than anyone announces. By lunchtime, 3 members of the household staff had mentioned it. By mid-afternoon, a junior equerry had used the phrase "quite something" in a context that made clear he meant it literally. By evening, the story had reached the 2nd floor by way of a private secretary who had heard it from the aide who had watched the whole thing from 30 feet away and had, in her own words, simply stood there like a lemon, because what do you do when a guardsman orders the queen consort to salute a child, and the queen consort does it? Charlotte, for her part, did not mention it at dinner. She mentioned the pigeons on the roofline. She mentioned that the gravel near the east entrance was a different color from the gravel near the west entrance, and had a theory about why. She mentioned that one of the guardsmen had very straight posture, and which she had decided was something worth practicing. She demonstrated this at the table, going rigid in her chair to her brother's immediate delight and her father's resigned amusement. She did not mention the salute, which was, in its own way, the most revealing thing about it. She had not stored it as a story. She had stored it as a fact, a thing that had happened because it was supposed to happen. She had saluted a soldier because soldiers deserved salutes, and the soldier had pointed out that the response had been absent. The response had then been given. Order restored. The world working correctly. That was, in Charlotte's internal accounting, simply how things went. It would take her years, and a different kind of understanding than 8-year-olds carry, to recognize what had actually moved through that courtyard. Not just a salute, not just a guardsman doing his job or a woman choosing grace over precedence, but something older and more stubborn. The way an institution breathes when a small hand forces a window open that habit had long since painted shut. Camilla had returned to her apartments by early afternoon. She had 3 letters to review and a telephone call that had been rescheduled twice and would, she suspected, be rescheduled again. She sat at her desk and looked at the papers in front of her and thought, without meaning to, about the weight of a child's salute. Not the gesture, and the intention in it. Charlotte had not saluted her because she was queen consort. Charlotte had not saluted her as a statement, or a performance, or a political act. Charlotte had saluted a guardsman because he was standing there doing something hard with complete commitment, and she had wanted him to know she saw it. And then, when the return had been missing, she had accepted Hartley's correction without argument and held her position until the thing was completed properly. 8 years old. And Camilla had met people 3 times her age who had never managed that. The ability to see service and name it, simply, without calculation. To hold out the full weight of your acknowledgment and wait, without embarrassment, for it to be received. She thought about Hartley, that quiet, unbreakable man. The 3 steps he had taken. The decision made in the space protocol allows, which is small but, apparently, large enough. She thought about what it cost him to speak. Not much. A guardsman correcting a lapse in ceremony was not technically a transgression, but she also understood that she was not technically just anyone. And he had spoken anyway, because a child had done something worth completing. She picked up her pen, put it down, looked at the window. Outside, the gray had deepened into the particular shade that precedes London dusk. A color without a proper name, somewhere between steel and violet, the sky settling into itself for the night. As she thought, there are people in this building who have forgotten that the ceremony is supposed to mean something. Then she thought, and then there are guardsmen like Hartley. She picked up her pen again and wrote, in the margin of a letter she was reviewing, a single word that her aide would later spend 20 minutes trying to decipher. The aide would eventually decide it said remind and would not know what it referred to or what it was meant to remind anyone of. And it said remember. The distinction mattered to Camilla. She did not often write in margins. 3 weeks after the morning in the courtyard, Sergeant David Hartley received a small envelope through the internal household mail. His name was written on the front in a hand he did not recognize. Neat, unhurried, the letters sitting at the same height with the precision of someone who had been taught to write as though the page were watching. Inside was a single card, cream-colored, no crest, in no formal heading. 4 lines. I am told you completed a salute that needed completing. It needed completing. Thank you for knowing that. C. He read it twice, folded it along its original crease, put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, against his chest, where it stayed for the rest of the shift. He told no one. This was not unusual. Hartley was not a man who catalogued his life for an audience. He had received commendations before, proper, and official ones with signatures and framing, and he respected them the way he respected all formal things, completely and without performance. But this was different in the way that things are sometimes different when they arrive without ceremony. When they find you at the level below rank and title and the careful architecture of institution. He had done his job. The letter said, yes, and it mattered. He had spent 19 years at posts where the question of whether anything mattered was not one you were supposed to ask. You did the job because the job was the job. The ceremony held its shape because you held yours. That was, in the strictest sense, sufficient. But there is a difference between sufficient and seen, and Hartley was human enough, underneath the stillness, underneath the composure that had been practiced until it was structural, to know which one he had just been handed. And he was seen by a woman who had spent decades having the opposite done to her. He thought about that, the particular poetry of it. The story might have ended there. A small courtyard moment, quietly absorbed into the long archive of things that happen inside palace walls and are never written down anywhere official. The kind of thing that becomes, over years, and a story someone tells to someone who tells it to someone else until it has lost its edges and becomes simply a pleasant thing people half remember hearing once. But institutions have a way of holding the things that happen inside them, even when they do not intend to. The people carry it, the air carries it, and sometimes, if the moment was real enough, it changes the shape of something, not dramatically, not with announcement, but in the quiet way that a single shift in weight changes a structure over time. Charlotte changed. Or rather, Charlotte continued being Charlotte, which was itself a kind of change because the world she was growing into was one that pressed hard on its children to become legible, to simplify, to fit the function they'd been assigned. She had been assigned several functions before she could pronounce all of them correctly, and none of them were wrong exactly, but none of them were the whole of her either. She was the daughter, the sister, the princess, the future face of something enormous and old and perpetually renegotiating its own survival. She was also the girl who had walked up to a ceremonial guardsman and saluted him because it seemed like the thing to do. In the months that followed the autumn morning, people who worked in and around the palace began to notice something they had trouble articulating. It was not a policy change. Nothing was announced. No one issued a directive. But there was a quality to the way Charlotte moved through formal spaces, a kind of deliberate attention, that her handlers privately called remarkable and her tutors called advanced situational awareness, and that one housekeeper, who had been at the palace for 32 years and had no patience for official language, called simply, "She looks at people," not the polished, trained look of someone who has been taught that eye contact signals warmth. A real look, the kind that costs something, the kind that says, "I see what you are doing, and I think it matters." She had learned it before the courtyard, probably. That quality does not emerge from a single morning, but something in the courtyard had confirmed it, had told her, in the precise language of a guardsman stepping forward and a woman setting down her briefcase, that the instinct was correct, that looking at people and naming their effort was not naive, was not the soft mistake of a child who did not yet understand how things worked, was, in fact, exactly how things should work. Hartley retired from his post in the spring of the following year. Not dramatically. His back had finally started winning the argument with the cold in a way he could no longer diplomatically ignore, and 19 years was a number that could stand without apology. His leaving was marked in the way such leavings are marked inside institutions, properly, with acknowledgment, with the forms of respect that have been refined over long enough that they mean something. At the small gathering held for him in one of the staff rooms off the East Wing, narrow room, good biscuits, and the kind of gathering that is efficient with sentiment because everyone present is British, he was presented with a commendation for distinguished service and a photograph taken on the grounds that he had not known was being taken, which he appreciated more than the commendation because it was of him being himself rather than performing himself. Afterward, standing in the corridor with his jacket over his arm, a younger guardsman named Ellis, 24, 2 years in, the kind of young man who still moved through the building with the slight self-consciousness of someone who hasn't yet stopped being impressed by where he works, said to him, "I heard about the salute. The princess. Is it true?" Hartley looked at him. "Yes," he said. Ellis thought about this. "And you told her, Camilla, that she needed to return it?" "I indicated," Hartley said, with the precision of a man who believes the choice of verb is the choice of story, That a salute given properly deserves to be properly received. That took, Ellis said, and paused, searching for the right word. Something. Hartley considered this. The protocol exists, he said finally, because the thing behind the protocol exists. A child understood that. My job was to make sure the protocol caught up. He put his jacket on, straightened it in the way of a man who has straightened jackets in front of mirrors for 19 years and now does it without mirrors. And without even looking down, just by feel, the muscle memory of a life built on doing the small things exactly right. He left. There is a version of this story that becomes about rank, or tradition, or the rules of royal ceremony. That version is not wrong. Those things were all present in that gray October courtyard, as present as the gravel and the pigeons and the flat pewter sky. But the version that stayed, in Hartley's chest pocket, in Camilla's handwriting, and in Charlotte's unhurried salute, was not about rank. It was about a child who looked at a man standing still in the cold and thought, that deserves something. It was about a guardsman who looked at an incomplete moment and thought, that needs finishing. It was about a woman who had spent years being the reason ceremonies went cold, stepping forward in a courtyard in a charcoal coat and returning a salute to an 8-year-old girl who had given it without asking for anything back. 3 people, a gray morning, the space that protocol allows. Some mornings the world does not break. Some mornings it simply holds. Imperfect, complicated, old, and still in its best moments, capable of something that feels a great deal like grace. Charlotte had offered her hand to tradition. Tradition had, for once, known what to do with it.